listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us today. I'm Don Winstead, co-chair of the Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition. Just to make sure you're in the right place at the right time, this webinar will provide you an overview of the 2016 year budget, requesting focus on urban and community forestry program. Today I am pleased to have Jan Davis, the Assistant Director in the State and Private Cooperative Forestry Program of the USDA Forest Service, on the webinar. Jan will open the webinar with a brief overview of the Urban and Community Forest Program and other programs' interest to Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition for the year 2016 fiscal year budget, as requested, or as request. Jan's background. Jan is an Assistant Director in the State and Private Cooperative Forestry Program of the USDA Forest Service, and as a National Program Leader for the Forest Service Urban Community Forest Program, she works with state forestry agencies, leverages resources through national partnerships, and builds coalitions. The second half of the hour will be hosted by our own SUFC policy chairs, Jerry Gray and Rebecca Turner. They will walk webinar participants through the key points of the 2016 SUFC budget recommendations. There will be a few minutes at the end for questions. You may submit these via raise your hand feature on the webinar site. A little background on Jerry and Rebecca. Jerry Gray is a forest conservation leader and policy expert who is currently providing consulting services through the Forest Conservation Leadership and has served as co-chair of the Policy Working Group and Steering Committee member of the Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition since 2010. Jerry has held leadership positions at the American Forest, a national nonprofit conservation organization in Washington, from 1988 to 2013, and has extensive experience working on national policy issues related to public and private forests. Rebecca Turner is Senior Director of Programs and Policy at American Forest and co-chairs the Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition Policy and Working Group. At American Forest, she oversees the formation and organization of policy agenda, government relations, and advocacy efforts, as well as aids in the development of new programming work. Finally, we'd like to thank Alliance for Community Trees, especially Sarah Anderson, for hosting this call and conducting all the behind-the-scenes technical work to make this webinar possible. With that, I'd like to hand the virtual mic over to Jan Davis. Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, Don. First off, I'd like to just express my thank you to Jen Hendricks and everyone helping her with SUFC with this invitation to present the fiscal year 2016 U.S. Forest Service budget proposal. This is something that the Washington Office Urban and Community Forestry Program has done now for about 4 years in an effort to inform our partners and stakeholders at least twice a year about the budget. We do this once through this spring budget call and again in the fall at the annual Arbor Day Foundation's Partner in Community Forestry Conference. On February of this year, President Obama released his fiscal year 2016 budget proposal. Today I'm going to share a brief overview of the Forest Service's budget with a focus on urban and community forestry and other relevant program areas. And I'll also provide an update on the current year 2015 budget. We've included a few PowerPoint slides as well, and a link to the fiscal year 2016 U.S. Forest Service budget justification has been provided as a reference as well. And then after all the presenters go, I'll be able to answer a few questions depending on the time. Okay, I'm waiting for the next slide to move. Okay. The President's proposed Forest Service budget in fiscal year 16 was $4.9 billion, which is actually $130 million less than the fiscal year 15 enacted level. This does include, however, strategic increases to meet public demands to increase forest restoration and reduce wildfire threats to communities. The U.S. Forest Service agency themes are similar to 2015, and are consistent with the strategic goals and objectives outlined in the Forest Service's new strategic plan that goes from 2015 to 2020 and is near its final release date. First, we are restoring resilient landscapes. Our nation's forests and ecosystems benefit the environment and create jobs in rural communities. We are accelerating the pace of restoration and job creation through restoration projects and research and development investments in forest health, research and development, and landscape scale restoration. Second, we are committed to building thriving communities across the nation by reconnecting people with the outdoors, providing recreation benefits, and harnessing the many economic opportunities of our land management activities in a way that provides jobs and public services. Building thriving communities within the Urban and Community Forestry Program means for us working in both urban areas, metropolitan areas, as well as rural communities. The agency's approach to managing wildland fire is integral to our goals of landscape scale restoration. We are committed to reducing the wildland fire threat to communities and safely and effectively managing wildland fire. Fourth, the Forest Service continues to explore our own safety culture and history, comparing ourselves to high reliability organizations that also work in high risk environments and working to change our safety culture accordingly. And last, part of the agency's inclusiveness effort is making our workforce look more like the face of America. This is critical to the Urban and Community Forestry Program delivery in urban areas, and the Forest Service is striving to become an employer of choice. Our Forest Service budget proposal for fiscal year 16 is in alignment with both USDA and the administration. I'd also like to point out that the 16 President's budget continues to call for a fundamental change in how wildfire suppression is funded to reduce fire risk, manage landscapes more holistically, and increase resiliency of the nation's forest and rangelands and the communities that border them. The cost of fire management has grown from 13% of the agency's budget in the 1990s to over 50% in 2014. With such cost, it places a demand on the agency's overall budget and jeopardizes our ability to successfully implement our full mission, which includes other programs such as the Urban Program. The budget proposes a fiscally responsible funding strategy that considers catastrophic wildland fires as disasters, to be funded in part by budget authority provided through a wildland fire suppression adjustment, which is outside the discretionary appropriation of the agency. This would free up funds for other programs in the agency, such as those in the cooperative forestry program, like the Urban Program. Okay, I'm going to the next slide. There's sort of a delay in our system here, but I think we're working through it. Okay. There are two themes in particular where the urban and community forestry work is very relevant: strengthening communities and restoration. In strengthening communities, while one of our best fit within the themes, you can see that the 2016 proposed budget was reduced by $4.3 million. It's not uncommon for the proposal to have a reduction that sometimes often changes as it goes through the process. Urban work also occurs within the theme of restoration. Within forest health management is also down $4.9 million from fiscal year 15. And research and development is another place that urban work goes on, and that has also decreased by $4 million. But it also does include $83 million for forest inventory analysis. There are a couple of things I want to mention within this research bullet here that state and private forestry and urban research coordinate monthly at the national level. We have established a technology, science, and delivery team, and we are working together with American Forest to build a joint web platform to share info and publish synthesis papers. I also want to mention some work of this team is the Urban Forest Connections webinar series that the team, which is comprised of the Urban Federal Program Managers and research staff, pull together for the second Wednesday of every month from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The next one is May 13th and will feature David Nowak and the science behind iTree. June's webinar will feature the subject of resilient cities. If you just Google the urban webinar, it usually comes up in the top 2, which we're pretty pleased about. But moving back to this slide, where we see an increase is urban in the restoration theme. That is the landscape scale restoration budget line item in state and private forestry. This budget line item increased from 9.5 million, increased from 12.5 million to 21 million, which is an increase of 9.5 million and a 68% increase. What this landscape scale restoration budget line item is meant to do is to build on previous what we call redesign efforts by working with state to continue innovative landscape scale projects. For those of you that may not be familiar when we say redesign, it is now the work of, it has been renamed and evolved into the work of a state and private forestry board, and it is an effort between Forest Service and NASF, National Association of State Foresters, leadership to make state and private forestry programs more strategic and more relevant. It removes the limitation of funds to a specific mix of funding. And as with the competitive funds in years past, urban and urban-related projects have competed well. There were 15 out of 55 projects submitted that successfully competed for LSR project funds in 2015 that had an urban component. That was about $3.6 million out of the $12.5 million nationwide. This is a testament to urban work, and it highlights the leverage that the urban and community forestry projects always bring with them. Okay, moving to the next slide. In this chart, you will see that these are the actual numbers reflected in the enacted budgets and the fiscal 2016 proposed Forest Service budget. The fiscal year 2015 enacted funding level was just over 28 million for the urban program. Program managers have finalized the fiscal year 15 national priorities. Allocations to national partners and regions in the northeastern area are complete, and resources are available to the field and local partners. In 2015, the Urban and Community Forestry Program continues to focus on mitigating and adapting to climate change, protecting and improving air and water quality, energy conservation, reducing the impacts of land use change, building urban forest resilience, and fostering sustainable communities. And in 2016, within this fostering sustainable communities focus, we are going to add an emphasis to improving community livability, which includes public health and urban agriculture. Before we go on to our next speaker, and also we will be doing questions after the next 2 speakers together, I want to mention that the 2015 marks the 25th year anniversary of the programs within the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act, which includes the urban program. There will be several celebrations and projects across the country to commemorate this anniversary. In fact, there were 9 ideas submitted in a competitive process out of about 20 that were recently chosen, and 9 of these 20s that were selected have either an urban, either are all urban, or in part have an urban component. So with that, I want to thank all of you that make this program a continued success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. This is Rebecca Turner with SUFC, and we're now moving into the next part of our program, which is Jerry Gray and myself discussing the SUFC policy working group initiatives. You are up, Jerry.
Thank you, Becky. So Becky and I are tag teaming this presentation. We're going to start by giving you a little bit of information about who the SUFC Policy Working Group is and some of our highlights from 2014 and our directions. And then we will go into the specifics of our FY16 requests to Congress for funding. So I'll start with a little bit of background and discussion of who our policy working group is. Thank you, Becky, for advancing that. Basically, our policy working group is one of the major functions of the SUFC. Many members of our coalition participate in this working group. Our primary functions and objectives are to use a variety of advocacy tools to increase tangible support for urban forests and green infrastructure, and that's not only at the national level but also regionally and locally through our member organizations and their regional and local members. Our second function is to really educate diverse audiences about the value and the need for healthy trees and green infrastructure in communities. The SUFC has been broadening out its membership of national organizations, and we continue to do that strategically as we reach out to diverse audiences. And thirdly, the Policy Working Group serves as a network for our members and an opportunity to leverage resources and knowledge with this increasingly diverse and broad array of organizations. And with that, I'll turn it back to Becky to discuss some of our work in 2014.
Great, thanks so much, Jerry. It was magic how it got moved forward. Oh, someone else is doing it. Is that you, Sarah? Thank you.
Oh.
It's magic. So thank you so much, Jerry. What I'll be going through now is the highlights from our work in 2014 and what we have planned for this year. The SUFC Policy Working Group has been active in our appropriations recommendations as well as other federal legislation and regulatory actions. In 2014, we secured a larger amount for urban and community forestry than was in the President's request. The President requested $24 million, and we were able to secure $28 million through our work with both the House and the Senate. We were also able to have included a report language supporting urban forest research as a priority for the Forest Service. For the first time, we conducted a flyout with Representative Joyce from Ohio. This is a field tour. He met with SUFC partners, the Davy Tree Company, who is headquartered in Representative Joyce's district. This resulted in cultivating a true urban forest champion. Representative Joyce sponsored our annual reception at the Botanical Gardens in 2015, as well as being a strong voice on the House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. Another area of focus that we spent time on in 2014 was the President's Climate Action Plan. In conjunction with the National Coalition Forest Climate Working Group, we provided urban forestry and green infrastructure recommendations to the administration. We were pleased to see these points incorporated in the President's priority agenda for natural resources climate resiliency. We have also engaged with the Forest Service and state foresters in the need to include urban forest data in the Forest Inventory Analysis, or FIA, as identified in the 2014 Farm Bill. We can move on to our highlights for 2015. Thank you. For 2015, we have been advocating for a broader set of requests across the federal agencies, and you'll see a summary of these in the next couple of slides. As pointed out by Jerry earlier, in the expansion of the SUFC National Coalition members, we've been able to look at programs within the EPA and the Department of Interior on ways to engage green infrastructure and urban forestry priorities across these agencies. We have plans to duplicate the success of the Ohio flyout. We are exploring flyouts in Maryland and California for this summer's recess. And we'll be continuing to explore opportunities for including urban forestry and green infrastructure and other agency efforts, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Park Service, and Fish and Wildlife Service. I'll turn it back to Jerry now to talk about our Forest Service programs that we've advocated for in this year's appropriations.
Thank you, Becky. I'll wait for our next slide, but our policy working group has a process each spring as we see the administration's proposals. We sit down as a large group and talk about how to select our priorities and then how to come to agreement among the fairly broad number of organizations on which level we should make our request at. And so I'll touch on that a little bit for each of these Forest Service programs for which we've made recommendations. Within the urban and community forestry program area, we chose to request $31.3 million, which is consistent with our request for the last few years. It's a pre-sequestration when Congress reduced budgets quite dramatically, known as sequestration. We stuck at the $31.3 million level, which is actually the fiscal year 2012 level of funding. And as Jan presented, the administration this year is requesting a reduced amount, and last year Congress appropriated the $28 million. So that's where we are for urban and community forestry. We this year, for the first time, recommended strong funding for the landscape scale restoration program, which Jan described. This is a key priority within the state and private forestry redesign effort, and it builds from the innovative landscape scale competitive grants efforts that the Forest Service has been implementing the last several years with state foresters. And so we, as the SUFC, were enthusiastic about collaborative landscape scale approaches. We did not respond to this item last year or make a recommendation for it because there was limited data on how this proposal might affect the urban and community forestry funding, and also how much funding might be available for urban forestry projects. But as Jan mentioned, a number of states have identified urban areas and urban projects as priorities within their state forest action plans, and we feel like this year the SUFC should and did endorse LSR, as it's called, at $23.5 million. Within forest and rangeland research, SUFC has always seen a strong connection between urban forestry research and urban forestry program. We work to try to integrate those two as best that we can. We understand that in communities, many of our members and partners functionally need the information from urban forest canopy assessments and tree health assessments. That information often comes from research, and also tools like iTree are critical to our work. So really, the research is an important element, and yet we have difficulty getting specific information, detailed information about investments in urban forestry research. So our strategy has been to basically support strong funding at this $303 million level for the broad budget line item for forest and rangeland research. We try to get at the lack of detail about urban forestry funding by, we have urged Congress the past few years to include report language. Report language accompanies the appropriations bill, and the past few years Congress has been including a statement which says Congress sees urban forestry research as really important and urges the Forest Service to maintain strong and vibrant support for urban forestry research. So we once again urge Congress to include that kind of language. We also touch on a couple of high priorities within research for the SUFC. One of them is this ongoing interest in integrating urban forestry assessment information into FIA, which is, Becky mentioned, is Forest Inventory and Analysis. And that's the broad national approach to gathering all data on forests, and urban forests have not been well included in FIA, and there are now pilot projects to begin to look at how to do that better, and we're just calling attention to this effort and trying to encourage strong efforts. And then finally, forest health research and specifically the issues around non-native pests, which often are introduced into large urban areas through trade and products coming in, being imported in. But these pests not only raise havoc in the urban forest, but also often can spread into the surrounding forest. So we made a special request for strong research efforts on these non-native pests, and that kind of segues into the fourth item on forest health management. Again, the research and the program are critical to integrate, and forest health management does a lot of work on both native pests and disease and exotic or non-native pests and disease entering forests. And this issue about how urban forests are often the entry point for some of these problems is critical for us. And we've requested $111 million overall. Within that, $48 million is targeted towards cooperative lands forest health management programs, and that includes the urban areas. That's it, Becky.
Thanks so much, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll be talking about the other areas that we have included in our appropriations. Under the Environmental Protection Agency, we have two areas of focus: the Clean Water State Revolving Funds and the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. As this group knows, green infrastructure is a cost-effective and resilient approach to stormwater infrastructure needs that provides many community co-benefits, from improving water and air quality to reducing energy use and mitigating climate change, improving habitat for wildlife, and reducing a community's infrastructure costs and promoting economic growth. We support the EPA's goal of strengthening green infrastructure activities to further sustainability goals by incorporating green infrastructure and enhancing stormwater management. And we also support the efforts to expand the green infrastructure to meet the Clean Water Act goals through the Clean Water State Revolving Funds. We supported the 2015 enacted levels of $1.449 billion for these state revolving funds. And we also supported the President's 2016 request of not less than 20% of the funding be made available for green infrastructure or environmentally innovative projects that can promote water system and community resilience. We see this as an ample opportunity for urban forestry and green infrastructure to play a larger role in stormwater infrastructure needs across the country. In addition to that, the Urban Waters Federal Partnership is a unique 13-agency effort that helps stimulate local economies, create jobs, improve quality of life, and protect health by revitalizing urban waterways and the communities around them, focusing on underserved urban communities of all sizes. The partnership projects serve as a laboratory for developing and implementing innovative approaches to using federal resources more efficiently and effectively. It's targeting investments and leveraging local leaders and community partners. Forest Service and urban and community forestry in particular have been part of this 13-agency effort, and we've seen that green infrastructure and urban forestry has played a key role in the implementation of restoring the urban waterways. While this isn't a called out line item in the budget, it sits under the Office of Water at the EPA. And so we encourage the continued funding from 2015. We also noticed this year that the USGS, within the Department of Interior, has requested $500,000 in their budget for this partnership as a called away piece to help that agency engage and promote this work. And we suggested that this kind of call out be established across the agencies that are all participating. We also looked at the National Park Service, and specifically under the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We support the LWCF and look at these two programs within the National Park Service as ways to promote urban forestry and green infrastructure. One is the State and Local Assistance Program, where $50 million of that we requested from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which includes $5 million for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. This is a new nationally competitive program that complements the existing state and local assistance program like creating new opportunities for outdoor play, as well as developing or enhancing outdoor recreation partnerships in cities. Along those lines, the Urban Parks Recreation Recovery Program, was a program that did exist, has gone away, and we'd like to see the reestablishment of this by using funding from the LWCF. It's essential to bring nature to urban communities. This competitive grant focuses on engaging and connecting communities, especially young people, to their neighborhood parks through projects that would revitalize and rehabilitate park and recreation opportunities. On a side note, which I forgot to mention in my earlier presentation, 2016 is the National Park Service's centennial year. Part of their promotion is a Find Your Parks campaign, where not only are we supporting efforts for the National Park Service and national parks, but also connecting Americans to the parks within their communities, whether it's state land or the city parks, to really encourage folks to understand and appreciate the nature that is in their neighborhoods. That is what we have for our appropriation levels for this year. I want to thank Jerry and Jan, as well as Sarah, for this. We are now in the Ask Your Questions portion. And I believe, Sarah, you'll be monitoring the questions? Or am I supposed to?
Sorry about that. Just had to
get questions at this time. I believe you can type. Thank you, Sarah.
Just had to get unmuted there. Sorry about that. If you have questions, please type them in the questions box on your GoToMeeting control panel. It looks like we've got some folks who have put in some questions. And while we're gathering questions, as Becky said, if you have further questions that we're unable to answer due to time, please email them to the address listed on this page. And Becky, the question should come through your chat box.
Thank you. So this one is for, I believe, Jan. Jan, does the U.S. Forest Service Research Deputy area share the same themes that the urban and community forestry area has?
Well, this is Jan. I can't talk on behalf of, or I don't want to talk on behalf of the research deputy area, but I will say that, like I had mentioned, Beth, Larry, and I, who's the urban research coordinator in the Washington office, work very closely together to make sure that our priorities are in alignment.
Okay. The next question is, if you could, Jan, if you could provide more detail as to the urban and forest community priorities and how that appropriations would be spent, and if there are any changes from previous years.
Well, the priorities are the priorities that we list in the annual budget direction, and they have been very similar over the last couple of years. And like I said, the only change that we would make to those for 2016 is just the addition of an emphasis on some public health issues and livable cities. And the program works through our state forestry agencies, and we make sure that the priorities we set are in alignment with the state action plans, as well as the strategic plans of the Forest Service and the Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Jen. You are on the hot seat. I've got more questions for you. People just don't want to care about asking Jerry and me questions. Okay, so the next question is in regards to iTree, and what if there are plans to make training for iTree and the use of it in other agencies, I'm assuming state agencies, what's the plans to increase the training for iTree?
Well, iTree is one of the software programs that the Deputy Area and Research manages. I do know that they have a training plan. They also have a advisory team that some of our state urban coordinators and our federal program managers assist with. So I don't know the details of their training plan, but I know that they do have one.
Great. And Jerry, we have a question for us.
Good.
NUCSAC is preparing the 10-year action plan, and to what degree does or should the action plan reflect or align with SUFC policy messaging?
Would you like me to start?
Why don't you start, because I just asked it.
Okay. The SUFC has been working over the past few years to try to strengthen our coordination with NUCFAC on information around, especially around research, but also policy issues. And so we've built a relationship where Jen Hinrichs, our convener for the SUFC, is a liaison, if you will, to NUCFAC, and has periodic meetings with NUCFAC to discuss some of these policy and future direction priorities for research as well. Those are our two major focal points: research and program policy activities. So we're trying to build the mechanism. I know SUFC has had good participation in providing information to developing the 10-year action plan and how we will, and we look forward to engaging as that draft 10-year plan is revised and refined.
Great, thanks, Jerry. In addition to this, there's opportunities for us to be more coordinated, I believe. The action plan they have been engaging the larger urban forestry community as a whole, and I believe that is an opportunity for SUFC to work with NUCFAC and the full urban forest community to make sure that we are coordinating our messaging. Okay, I have another question here. Let's see if I can help rephrase this. Okay, Jan, this is a question for you. What are the grant opportunities for nonprofits within the urban and community forestry?
Well, we work through our state forestry partners, and each state sets up their own programs based on the authorities in the Farm Bill and the guidance that we provide. So there's a lot of opportunity at the local level for nonprofits working with the state forestry agencies. And then at the national level, we work with organizations like with Alliance for Community Trees when we see opportunities to take advantage of some national programs like the ones that have been mentioned through Urban Waters and the HUD and EPA and NIFWIF.
Great. Okay, we have a few more minutes for more questions. If anyone has any, please feel free to ask away.
And if we don't get any in this round, we are certainly able to answer questions via email if you just want to contact any of us directly.
Great. I have one more question for us, Jerry. The appropriations testimony that we discussed was provided to the House. It is going to the Senate I believe this week. And we will be having meetings on the Hill regarding these, not only with the Appropriations Committee staff, but other key congressional members. One opportunity is for folks to reach out to their their congressional members and ask for support for the urban and community forestry, for forest research, and other priorities. So this is an opportunity to really engage and see immediate results, sort of, immediate for Congress, immediate results in your advocacy efforts. Last year, not only were we able to raise the funding, but in one draft of the Interior Bill, urban and community forestry wasn't mentioned at all. So through SUFC efforts and our members' organizations, we were able to not only reinstate urban and community forestry, but increase the funding. Looks like I have a couple more questions. Let's see. Okay, so I believe this one is to you, Jerry.
Okay.
Urban and forestry community leverages modest federal funding more successfully than most other programs. How do we make this more visible for folks, to not only Congress, but to others, on how effective we are in leveraging the urban and community forestry money?
I think that's a very important question. It's one that members of the SUFC and the policy working group ask fairly frequently, and I do believe that that's true. That many communities leverage relatively limited federal funding quite significantly through both local governmental and non-governmental sources and volunteer help and everything else. But I think our challenge is often having difficulty as a national coalition. It's a bit of a challenge to come up with a national number for leveraging. It's easier to use examples from specific places where cities on certain projects have estimated their leverage. And so my sense has been that the best way to make this visible is to have urban and community forestry participants from real places who have worked on real projects bring those leveraging numbers in and really speak to them. They can range a fair bit, I believe, but they don't usually get much more than $2 or $3 to each federal dollar, but sometimes they're up at 7, 8, 10, more than that I've seen. So I think it's just important for members of our various organizations to recognize how important that leveraging number is, and to make it as clear as possible whenever you are able to talk with policymakers about specific projects. Bring that leveraging number in and highlight it. And we as national partners just need to say it's really important, and it may range. And if we have examples, that's going to be our best way to do it, I believe.
And Jerry, this is Jan. I'd like to also comment that on the Forest Service end of things, we've thought about this quite a bit, and we're actually working, we have an accounting system, we call it CARS. It's our community accounting and reporting system, and we're looking at ways to make changes to that so that we don't lose the power of the data that we've collected over the last 7, 8 years now, but ways that we can add to that to better way to tell our story nationally and be able to roll up the stories from the states to the national level to communicate better.
Great.
I've got a couple more that are more recommendations for us, so I want to make sure we point these out. One is for SUFC, as we are making our fly-out visits, to reach out to the state foresters in those states and engage them during these flyouts as we're doing field tours. And the other is in regards to the Arbor Day Partners Conference. SUFC hosts an event, and has there been efforts to get members of Congress and other leadership to these events? For those who have attended Partnership Conference, you know how inspiring it is, and the networking opportunities there. And one thing we can definitely do more of is within each of the cities that we have these conferences to reach out to the state staff and make sure that they're aware that the conference is in their city, and if it coordinates with a time where the senator or the representative is home, to make sure there's always an invitation. But also, we know how important it is to engage staff in these and make sure that the local staff are invited and can be introduced, to the urban forest community that is represented at these conferences. And then finally, our last question, and I'm not sure, Jan, if you have the answer for this, but the question was, what are the opportunities for research funding for university researchers that are non-Forest Service?
Well, again, I think our Deputy Area in Research could provide a longer answer to this, but I will say that one of the opportunities that still exists is through the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council grants. We often grant to universities that are not part of the regular U.S. Forest Service cooperators that we work with.
Great. Thanks so much. That's it for our time. Thank you again to Sarah at AC Trees, to Jerry and Jan for their time here. If you have any further questions that you think of, please remember to email them to sufc@rcn.com. Thank you again, and we look forward to your continued engagement in the urban forestry world.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.